Let's go to our next question. It is a video. It comes from Matthew Thompson in Toowong, Victoria.
I'm an atheist. What do you think will happen when I die, and how do you know?
George Pell, we'll start with you. You ought to be an authority on this, I imagine.
Well, I know from the Christian point of view, God loves everybody, that every genuine motion towards the truth is a motion towards God, and when an atheist dies, like everybody else, they'll be judged on the extent to which they have moved towards goodness and truth and beauty. But in the Christian view, God loves everyone except those who turn their back on him through evil acts.
Oh, so atheism not an evil act?
No, not no, I don't. In most cases, it's not. So many honest atheists.
I guess to get to the point of the question, I suppose. I mean, he may be having a little wager here, but is it possible for an atheist to go to heaven?
Well, it's not my business.
No, but you're the only authority we have here.
I would say certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And just on the subject of heaven, if we can, what is your own concept of what heaven is?
Well, even St. Paul was severely agnostic, but one way in which the Christians differ from the Greeks believed in the immortality of the soul. We Christians believe, with one section of the Jewish people, in the resurrection of the body. So in some sense we will be there as continuing persons. In some, with a new heaven and a new earth, with all the good things that we've done will be incorporated into the new heaven and new earth. How it'll work out, I don't know, because I think physically and morally and intellectually we're at our peak at different stages in our life. How it'll work out, I've got no idea, but that's the general outline of Christian teaching.
But you think about it as a kind of collection of individual souls. In fact, obviously billions and billions of individual souls with their own personality existing in some galactic space.
I think that's a traditional, that's certainly the traditional Christian view. It's the view that I accept, and it's also the view of some of the Jews.
Richard Dawkins.
Well, the answer to the question, what's going to happen when we die, depends whether we're buried, cremated, or give our bodies to science. Can
I say this? If you're actually an agnostic and you keep aside this small portion of your brain for subsequent proof, I mean, you might get presented with that proof when you die.
The brain is what we do our thinking with. The brain is going to rot. That's all there is to it. I'm intrigued by the Cardinal saying that the Christians believe you're going to be resurrected in the body. I mean, that's an astonishing idea, and I don't believe you really mean that. And I think, just as I don't believe you really mean that the wafer turns into the body of Christ, you must mean body in some rather special sense.
Mr. Dawkins, I don't say things I don't mean.
Well, then what do you mean?
I'll tell you. And I've just explained what the bodily resurrection means to the extent that I can understand it. I certainly believe that when the words of consecration are uttered, that they become the body and blood of Christ. Now, I've had a little kid come up to me when that was explained and say, can I have a look in the chalice to see if it's turned to blood? And of course it hasn't. We don't believe that. It's not against reason. I believe it because I believe the man who told us that was also the Son of God. He says, this is my body, this is my blood. And I'd much prefer to listen to him and take his word than yours.
But other Christian denominations are quite happy to take that as a symbolic, metaphorical meaning. Catholics take it as a literal meaning, and I take it. I'm trying to be charitable by trying to suggest that it's that same sense in which you say that the body is resurrected, because the body is certainly not resurrected in terms of the cell, the protoplasm, the proteins, the DNA. That doesn't happen any more than the wafer turns into that. You're right when you said that to the child. So you do not mean that the wafer turns into the body in any sense in which normal English language usage would would understand. You mean it in some other sense, and I take it it's that same sense that the body is resurrected.
Well, can I ask you whether you do mean it in a metaphorical sense, in the same way that you believe Adam and Eve are metaphorical creatures?
I don't. I follow it. I understand it. According to a system of metaphysics that was spelled out by the Greeks before Christ came, which we've adopted. And that is, there's a substance which is the core of a being, and it is revealed to us through what are called accidents. Now, I believe that the core of the being becomes the bread, becomes the body and blood of Christ. It continues to look exactly as it was. We believe that in the Catholic Church. Now, I know you're a cultural Anglican, and we can't blame the Anglican.
I'm also a rationalist. I use English is my native language. The wafer does not become the body of anybody in the English language.
All right, no, I think we've resolved that you both disagree on this point rather substantially. Let's go to our next question, which is from Michael Matty.
Is it okay to tell a child that God doesn't exist?
Richard Dawkins.
I think it's okay to tell a child the truth. But I would prefer to encourage a child to make up her own mind and to think about the evidence and to believe things when there is evidence. What I think is not okay, what I think is deeply immoral, is to tell a child that when she dies, if she's not good, she's going to go to hell. That seems to me to be mental child abuse and an utter disgrace.
I remember when I was in England, we were preparing some young English boys. They're from very... preparing them for
Come on.
Thank you. Preparing them for First Communion. And they were very patriotic young lads. And one of them announced very breezily to me that he didn't believe in hell. And I mean, certainly the idea of any child being sent to hell, I agree that is grotesque, and that's not the Christian God. But anyhow, this kid, I said simply, Hitler. Do you think Hitler might be in hell? Started the Second World War, caused the death of 50 million? Or would you prefer a system where Hitler got away with it for free? Anyhow, the little kid was quite patriotic, and he said, he realised hell was in with a chance if Hitler was going to go there.
What about a system where he was simply obliterated and didn't exist anymore?
Well, he would have got away with too much as far as I'm concerned.
So you actually prefer the idea of hell as a place of punishment but for who? Where do you draw the line? Do unbelievers go to hell?
No. The only people... one, I hope nobody's in hell. We Catholics generally believe that there is a hell. I hope nobody's there. I certainly believe in a place of purification. I think it'll be like getting up in the morning and you throw the curtains back. The light is just too much. God's light would be too much for us. But I believe... on behalf of the innocent victims in history, that the scales of justice should work out. And if they don't, life is radically unjust. The law of the jungle prevails.
Okay, I'm just going to go to our next question, which we can respond to some of these issues through that. It's a video question. It comes from Nick Walsh in Nyngan, New South Wales.
How can there be a compassionate God who is all-powerful and has created us, yet we suffer? Why create such a world in the first place?
Richard Dawkins, you can reflect on that and the previous question.
Well, it's hardly my business to say how could a compassionate God like that exist. Darwin himself said it was impossible for him to believe in a God who was capable of creating such suffering. He actually was talking about suffering in the animal kingdom.
Do you assume that suffering is a natural part of the human condition?
It's a natural part of the living condition. It's a natural part of Darwinian natural selection, which is one of the reasons why I was so keen to say that I didn't want to live by Darwinian principles, there is massive amount of suffering in the natural world, a huge amount of suffering, and it seems to me that's an almost inevitable consequence of Darwinian natural selection. I'm more interested, however, in what's true than in what I would like to be true. It would be very nice if there were no suffering in the world. It would be very nice if there were a sort of natural scale of justice, as the Cardinal was saying. But I'm more interested in what's true. So it's not the business of an atheist to justify the ways of God to man. It is the business of a cardinal.
Okay, let's go to the Cardinal. The question was, how can there be a compassionate God who's all-powerful and has created us and yet we suffer? Why create such a world in the first place?
I think that's probably the hardest question for us to answer.
Do you struggle with it?
Yes. If I get a chance to say, to ask a question when I die, I think I'll ask the good God, why is there so much suffering? That's a problem for us. I think the greater problem and I'll come back to the question because it's a very good one. That's the heart of what we're about. I think it's a much greater problem for the atheist to explain why there is goodness and truth and beauty. Our problem is to cope with suffering. Now, one of the unique, I think, certainly special features of Christian teaching is the value of redemptive suffering. And that is the significance of Christ suffering with us and dying on the cross. And that helps people. My first Easter after I was a priest, it was in the hills in Italy. Very sad village. All the men were away in Germany or Switzerland getting big money, home only for 3 weeks a year. And people were coming to confession, coming for consolation. I was even wetter behind the ears than I am now. I didn't know what to say. And eventually I said to someone, well, look, Christ suffered too. Christ had a bad run. Christ died on the cross, and we believe that through his suffering, good will eventually triumph.
Can I take it to a bigger level than that village, to the Holocaust, to genocide, to famine? If there is an omnipotent and all-powerful God, why does he let these things happen?
That's a very good question, but if God is going to allow us to be good, he's got to give us freedom. There's no alternative to that.
But he chose to intervene at different times in history to save the Jews when they were going over the river Jordan. I mean, there are many times when apparently God has intervened in biblical times. Why not now?
Well, that's, I think Revelation is complete. That's a mighty question. He helped probably through secondary causes for the Jews to escape and continue. It's interesting, through these secondary causes, probably no people in history have been punished the way the Germans were. It's a terrible mystery.
Well, I think there'd be a very strong argument saying that the Jews of Europe suffered worse than the Germans.
Yes, that might be right. Certainly, the suffering in both. I mean, the Jews. There was no reason why they should suffer.
Okay, I'm just going to. We're running out of time. I'm going to go to another question. It's on a different subject from Anita Wu.
Jesus preaches, "Love thy neighbour as thyself." So, Cardinal Pell, how can you be against giving our gay neighbours marriage rights when equality and respect are the fundamental foundations of loving and spreading love?
Well, it's quite misleading and quite unfair to suggest that Christians hate homosexuals. Christians love everybody. We believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, that it is for the continuity of the human race. We believe that men and women are made for one another spiritually, psychologically, physically. We believe that a man and a woman as a father with their children is far and away the best and most efficient and most economical system to bring up children, and governments should support it. For homosexual couple to have a union, well and good. There's no reason why that can't be.
Can I just interpose a quick question on this? We are running out of time. I mean, do you believe that homosexuality, since it's not a question of choice, is part of God's natural order?
Oh, creation's messy. I think it's the Oriental carpet makers always leave a little flaw in their carpet because only God's perfect.
But you're suggesting that homosexuals are flawed human beings?
Not necessarily. But what I am saying is I don't think homosexual activity is simply the result of genetic makeup, because we are free. We can control our instincts, and like heredity and environment, a lot of this practice is learned. But whatever about it, we've got to try to support these people, show compassion. The Catholic Church has a great record there. We look after more HIV sufferers than any other non-government organisation, but we don't believe it's possible to have homosexual marriage.
I'm going to, we're almost out of time. We've got time for one more question that both of our guests can answer. It's from Catherine Chen.
As an atheist, Professor Dawkins, do you believe that believing in God for emotional support should be allowed even temporarily? Research has proven that people who believe in God has a better chance of surviving terminal illnesses such as cancer, as well as living longer when they go to church. So do you think that believing in God is beneficial for our well-being, even if God is an illusion?
It's perfectly possible that, as you say, believing in God has beneficial effects upon health. It's possible that you're less likely to suffer a duodenal ulcer or something of that sort. But I do have to stress, I mean, that's an utterly trivial argument compared to the truth of whether the God actually exists or not. I mean, that's a really big question. It's an important question, one that the Cardinal and I would agree on. And if there is some minor benefit to health one way or the other, the evidence is not good, by the way, but even bending over backwards to suggest that the evidence is there, that psychosomatic illness may be healed, may be alleviated somewhat by belief in God. Psychosomatic medicine is well known. Placebos work. If God is simply a placebo, that's fine. But I'm interested in whether he's actually there.
Okay, Cardinal Pell, final word, actually.
Yeah, so am I. It's a question of truth. Christians don't present God as like Santa Claus, something that a myth that's useful for children. And believing in God and being a Christian cuts both ways. More people were killed for their Christian belief in the last century than any other century, probably than all the other centuries combined. They died on principle to be faithful to Jesus. So we might get some benefits. We mightn't get ulcers. We might live a bit longer. That might have much more to do with our heredity. But we follow Christ because we believe it's the truth. I think it does bring a peace of mind. It does help us. But sometimes it gets us into... my life would be much simpler and much easier if I didn't have to go to bat for a number of Christian principles.
Have you ever regretted that you do?
Sometimes I wonder.
Seriously?
No.
Okay, that's all we have time for tonight. Before we go, let's check the final results of tonight's Quanda vote. With more than 20,000 of you voting, we have a 76% saying no. Religious belief does not make the world a better place. Please thank our special guests, Professor Richard Dawkins and Cardinal George Pell.